Okay, yes, it's working. Good. So if everybody has here in the sanctuary, I want to also ask at this time, we're going to be, I want to ask children of survivors. I don't think we have any Holocaust survivors here in the room, but we have children of survivors here. So I'd like children of survivors to light our candles. So if you can arrange yourselves here to my right, please, now, into 6 groups. All right, so 1 candle for each group to come up, and you'll let me know when you come up who's going to light what candle, because that'll be on the 2nd page of the service. So we start with this responsive reading. Lord, as we gather today on Yom HaShoah, it is tonight and tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, we pray for courage and we pray for strength. For as we recall the 6 million, the innocents tortured, maimed, and murdered, we are afraid to remember, but we are even more afraid to forget. We ask for wisdom that we might mourn and yet not be consumed by hatred, that we might remember the past and yet find the courage to face the future, that we might face past evil and yet not lose faith in future good. We cannot erase past suffering, but we can determine that it will not be in vain. And so we pray for those who were given death, give us the courage to choose life. For those who stood silent, give us the strength to take a stand.
For those who could only die as Jews, give us the chance as Jews to live.
To teach ourselves, to raise our young, to learn from hate that we must love, to learn from evil, to live for good. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Candle 1 we light for remembrance. Remember, do not forget. Sorry. It doesn't matter. With this candle of remembrance, we vow to remember the struggles and sufferings of the past. Hitler's goal was not to end life, but to wipe out its memory as well. If we forget those who perished, they die a second time. We will remember. Candle 2, we light for life. I set before you life and death, blessing and curses, therefore choose life. With this candle of life, we vow to make the choice to live. As we remember the tyrants and peoples who would make of life a curse, so may we strive to make of it a blessing. We choose life. Candle 3, we light for Zion. Out of Zion will go forth Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. With this candle, we give thanks for the land of Israel and for its message that the people of Israel lives. But may Israel, our holy land, stand for much more than physical survival alone. May it stand for justice, may it stand for hope, may it stand for peace. Candle 4, we light for Torah. I give you good teaching, forsake it not. With this candle, we reaffirm our commitment to the light of Torah. May we ever continue our search for understanding of our responsibilities within God's divine plan. May our lives be transformed from mere existence to the realm of holy being. May our days reflect the values of our faith. Candle 5, we light for justice. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. May nations be ever alert to the danger of appeasing evil. May they rather seek to protect even the least among peoples. Candle 6, we light for faith. May we remain faithful to the teachings of Torah, to the word of the Lord, and to the memory of those who perished. We want to thank the children of survivors for lighting the candles for us, and may the memories of your family members and all of the 6 million be for a blessing. We find the partisan song on the next page, And we're used to the partisan song being sung in Yiddish by Rita Rubenstein, may she rest in peace, and Susan Goldsamt. Here, it's in Hebrew translation and an English translation. So I'll sing the first stanza in Hebrew. Then there are two bolded stanzas in the English, and we'll sing those two bolded ones together. Al na tomar hine darki ha'achrona, et or hayom histiru shmei ha'anana, ze yom nichsafnu lo od ya'al ve'yavo, umitzadenu od yarim anachnu po, ze yom nichsafnu lo od ya'al ve'yavo, umitzadenu od yarim anachnu po. From land of palm tree to the far-off land of snow, we shall be coming with our torment and our woe. And everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. And everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. Amud hashachar al yomenu or yahel, im hatzorer yachlof tmolenu kemotzel, ach im chalila ye'acher lavo haor, kemo sisma yehe hashir midor ledor, ach im chalila ye'acher lavo haor, kemo sisma yehe hashir midor ledor. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. It's not a song that birds sing overhead. It was a people among toppling barricades that sang the song of ours with pistols and grenades. It was a people among toppling barricades that sang the song of ours with pistols and grenades. Al kain al na tamar darki ha'achrona, et or hayom histiru shmei ha'anana, ze yom nichsafnu lo od ya'al ve'yavo, umitzadenu od yarim anachnu po, ze yom nichsafnu lo od ya'al ve'yavo, umitzadenu od yarim anachnu po. Just have to admit people, okay. And there are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for mankind. Let's continue responsively. Tonight we remember 6 million of our people, 6 million Jews brutally and methodically destroyed by civilized people, acting in a manner totally devoid of even the suggestion of humanity. The cruelties of Pharaoh, Haman, Nebuchadnezzar, and Titus cannot be compared with the diabolical schemes of the modern tyrants in their design to exterminate an entire people. The blood of the innocent who perished in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, Treblinka, and Theresienstadt cries out to God and humanity. We will never forget the burning of synagogues and houses of study, the destruction of holy books and scrolls of Torah, the sadistic torment and murder of scholars, sages, and teachers. They tortured the flesh of our brothers and sisters, but they could not crush their spirit, their faith, their love. We recall how our brothers and sisters in the Warsaw Ghetto and in Treblinka valiantly rose up and defied the monstrous adversaries. Even as we mourn, we recall those precious few compassionate men and women of other faiths and nationalities who, at the peril of their own lives, saved some of our people. Truly, the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. O Lord, remember your martyred children. Remember all who have given their lives for the sanctification of your name. We rise for the El Maleh in memory of the 6 million. El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamatzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim Etoharim, כזוהר הרקיע מסירים לנשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל שנטבחו בשואה, אנשים, נשים וטף, שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of our brothers and sisters who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. We have the mourners' Kaddish with names of concentration camps and death camps in the Holocaust. Let's do that together, just on Zoom. Yitkadal, Lodz, V'yitkadash, Gurs, Shemei Rabbah, Warsaw. Be'alma divra chirute, Bogdanovka, V'yamlich malchute, Ravensbrück, B'chayechon u'v'yomechon, Vilna, Uvachaye dechol Beit Israel, Treblinka, Ba'agala uvizman kariv, Chelmno, Ve'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, Leolam Olmei Olmaya, Yitbarach Ve'yishtabach, Belzek, Ve'yitpar Ve'yitromam, Buchenwald, Ve'yitnaseh Ve'yithadar, Sobibor, Ve'yitaleh Ve'yitalal, Maidanek, Shemei de Kudasha Brichu, Malthausen, Le'ela, Babiyar, Minkol Birchata, Veshirata, Bergen-Belsen, Tushbechata, Venechemata, Dachau, Da'amiran Be'alma, Auschwitz, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shloma Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, v'yaseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Let's remain standing for the songs on the final page. I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when feeling it not. I believe in God even when he is silent. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam, hachol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. O Lord my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of man, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of man. And let's face the Israeli flag as we conclude with Hatikva. Kol balei b'bnei May be seated. So to those who have joined on Zoom since we started the service, we had the evening service, then we had this Yom HaShoah service that was put together by Lisa Arbor a number of years ago. I've hit record on Zoom so that for those who might not have been able to make it this evening, we'll be able to send the recording to them. And I want to now, at this time, call on Rhea Siers. Rhea, many of us know Rhea as a former vice president of the synagogue, active in the synagogue over the years, and leading services on at least Yom Kippur morning, if not all of the high holiday mornings as well. But outside of the synagogue, Rhea had a life too, as an intelligence expert for NSA, spending her career there, and also now in retirement from NSA as an adjunct professor both at George Washington University and Johns Hopkins University, which gets her to go to Israel to teach a class there too on terrorism. And she and Joe were in Israel recently visiting their daughter Julia and son-in-law and grandchildren. And as a child of Holocaust survivors, I thought it might be interesting for Rhea to share with us her impression of what is the feeling in Israel now post-October 7th, as Israel is fighting the war with Hamas. Sometimes it seems that Israel is fighting that war on its own anyway, that gets into a whole other conversation. But the idea of how, as a child of Holocaust survivors, as an intelligence expert, how does this all reflect what she saw in Israel a couple months ago to the Holocaust? And what lessons do we learn about the Jewish psyche that can carry us forward? So you could say whatever you want, Rhea, but that was the basis of my reaching out to Rhea to have her share her words. So Rhea.
Thank you, Jonah. So the official name of Yom HaShoah in Hebrew is Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, Holocaust and Heroism Memorial Day. On this Yom HaShoah, I want to speak about the essence of heroism, the resilience and spirit that Holocaust survivors carried with them out of the ashes of their families and communities. That spirit of resilience is not new to Jews. It is endemic to our history, but I believe that rising from the Shoah was the ultimate act of resistance and resilience that powers another incredible story of resilience today, that of the state of Israel, especially since October 7th. As Jonah mentioned, I am the daughter of two Holocaust survivors. When I eulogized each of them, I repeated the same line we used during Shir HaMa'alot, Psalm 126, which is a song of going up of Jews returning to Zion. The line is, Hazorim b'dima b'rina yiktsoru. Those who have sown seeds in tears shall reap them in joy. And this is the epitome of resilience, not only surviving, which was difficult enough, but rebuilding their lives, their families, and their communities, moving forward despite the terrible burden of losses, but of course never forgetting all that they had lost. So let me tell you a little bit about my parents, Jenny Herman and Charlie Siers. And I will get a little choked up.
Speak a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay. They both persevered and survived against the odds. My mother, Jenny, was born into a middle-class family in Brussels. By all accounts, they had a good life in a very large extended family. My father, however, was born in Żychlin, Poland, a small town southwest of Warsaw, with a strong Jewish community, and I would say the usual challenges from entrenched anti-Semitism. But his memories of his family, his two brothers, two sisters, and his parents were, of course, sweet and loving. My father's town, Żychlin, was occupied by a German police battalion, not the German military, after the Nazi invasion of Poland. Life deteriorated very rapidly for the Jews of Żychlin. Shortly after the Germans arrived, the killings of Jews started. Later, the Jews were forced from their homes and the ghetto was formed. And finally, on Purim, in March 1942, they were deported to the Chelmno extermination camp. Out of the 9,000 Jews in Żychlin, at the start of World War II, about 30 survived, and one of them was my father. There were no other survivors from his family. Everyone was gone, murdered. I should add that I recently learned the actual names of their murderers. I discovered that my grandfather, grandmother, and aunt were shot to death by 4 German police officers, I have their names, before the final deportation of the Jews of Żychlin began. The Nazis, like other fascists and terrorists, sought to undermine resilience by ripping apart the fabric of the community, tearing down the cohesiveness of the family, and rendering Jews strangers in places they had lived for centuries. Just the mere act of survival was as much resilience or resistance as anyone could expect from the Jews subjected to the Nazi final solution. My parents and other survivors would tell you that they were lucky, that a twist of fate was the difference between life and death. But I think there's more to my parents' story than that, including the lessons they teach us about resilience. They both were lucky enough to leave their homes before they could be swept up into the maelstrom. My mother's father had business in Germany in the 30s, and he saw what was happening to the Jews there. He returned to Belgium shaken, and the family elders decided if the Nazis invaded Belgium, they would send their children, my mother's generation of cousins, away to seek refuge. They were determined that the younger generation would be given a chance at survival. So the family celebrated one last bar mitzvah in May 1940, one last simcha, and affirmation of their faith, before the children left Belgium and their parents went into hiding. The cousins, my mother and her brother, tried to get to England, but couldn't, so they headed to the south of France, where they were arrested by French Vichy collaborators. The boys and girls were separated. My mother and her sister-in-law were detained in Perpignan, near the French border with Spain. They were placed on a train to Auschwitz, but it broke down before it could depart. In that short time, my mother's youngest uncle, only 8 years her senior, bribed Vichy officials, got her off the train, and they headed together on an arduous journey across the Pyrenees Mountains to Spain, where they remained under house arrest until the end of the war. Clearly a twist of fate. My father missed curfew in his town one night and had to remain in the meatpacking house with a Nazi official, a veterinarian. My grandfather was a kosher butcher and had a connection to the building. The German got drunk, very drunk, and told my father that they fully intended to kill all the Jews in Jechlim, and they would start with Jewish leaders and the Zionist organizations in which my father, then only 15, was an active member. My father had already seen Jews gunned down in the streets. He needed no further convincing of what was coming, but it tore at his soul to leave his family. He wanted them to leave too, but they had no place to go. His parents gave him permission to leave because they knew he had a chance at survival. And because they were willing to let him go, he lived. Having shared a small part of my parents' story, I want to give you 3 examples of the resilience of Holocaust survivors. 2 are small and personal. 1 recounts the resilience of concentration camp survivors. My first 2 stories are about my mother and father. As I mentioned, my mother did eventually make it to Spain, living in Madrid. Her brother did not make it. His train didn't break down, and he was sent to Auschwitz. My mother's parents were in hiding in Brussels, and as you can imagine, very anxious for any news from their children. My mother did not want them to lose hope, and she knew if she told them her brother, Jules, had been deported, they would despair. So at the age of 15, she wrote letters mimicking Jules's handwriting and manner as if he and she were together in Madrid. She did this until the end of the war. A small act to support the resilience of her parents to keep her family from further pain. My father's war experience was truly amazing and, of course, incredibly perilous. He literally traversed Russia and Europe, joined a partisan unit, and ultimately made his way to Brussels, where he lived in a house for displaced persons, all Jewish young men who had lost their families. One day he was walking to work, and he saw a young man he recognized from their group house. His name was Sam, and he was a Warsaw Ghetto survivor, and like my father, was the sole survivor of his family. Sam was sitting by the railroad tracks crying. My father was worried he might kill himself. So he walked over to Sam and asked him why he was crying. Sam told him of losing his entire family and how he was all alone. My father decided on a solution right then and there. Since Sam was a couple of years younger, he informed Sam that he was adopting him as his younger brother, and neither of them would be alone any longer. Now they would have family again. After my father married my mother, my grandmother also adopted Sam as part of the extended Belgian family. After my mother and father left for the United States, Sam went to Australia. They remained brothers and in contact until their deaths. My father's act of resilience was to ensure that they would find a very small way to reconstitute the family threads that had been shredded and to give hope to 2 orphaned boys from Poland. These 2 acts by my parents were acts of kindness, not random acts of kindness, but intentional acts of kindness that support and nourish resilience. The third and final act of Holocaust resilience is one that some of you may be familiar with. The British Army liberated the Bergen-Belsen death camp in April 1945. Just several days later, a British Jewish Army chaplain led a service for the survivors. A BBC radio reporter recounted the scene. This is what he said. "Around us lay the corpses there had not been time to clear away. People were still lying down and dying in broad daylight. A few hundred people gathered together, sobbing openly, in joy at their liberation and in sorrow at the memory of their parents, brothers, and sisters that had been taken from them, gassed and burned. These people knew they were being recorded. They wanted the world to hear their voice. They made a tremendous effort to sing one thing, which quite exhausted them." So what did they sing? They sang Hatikva, and at the end of the song, you can hear a voice declaring, Am Yisrael El Chai, the people of Israel live. So is there any question about the extraordinary resilience of the Jewish people and these survivors? After all the horrors they had endured, One of their first acts after liberation was the affirmation of Jewish peoplehood and hope. Hatikva is now, of course, the national anthem of Israel, but it is also the clear expression of Jewish hope and resilience. I have never felt the convergence of sadness, resilience, and hope the way I did after the Black Sabbath of the 7th of October. You see, I am not only the daughter of Holocaust survivors, but I am also grandmother to 2 Israelis. The first scene that demonstrated the clarity and uniqueness of Israeli resilience to me was shortly after the October 7th attack. Many of you saw the news clips. Israeli reservists from overseas grabbing a bag, holding up their call-up notice, and crowding planes to return home to defend their homeland, their families. They literally sat in the aisles of these planes for the entire trip back to Ben Gurion. They rushed home to face the danger and uncertainty. They would not run away from our enemies. They would not accept the role of victims. They were the vanguard of Jewish resilience, not just surviving, but facing the danger and defending the Jewish people. And that's an important point about resilience that comes directly from the survivors of not only the Shoah, but also the Farhud, the violent dispossession of Jews from Arab lands. The post-Shoah lesson about resilience is that it must come from a position of strength. Coupled with the physical and emotional impact of the initial Hamas attack and the ongoing hostage saga, we should also realize that Israel's resilience depends not only on its military, but on the ability of the Israeli populace to move forward after the body blow of October 7th. In Israel, resilience connotes a deep connection between the citizens and the viability of the nation. Without that connection and that inner strength, it would be difficult to fathom how Israel could have flourished after so many years of conflict, even with its military might. I really have never seen anything like the incredible impact of civilian volunteerism in Israel in the wake of the 7 October attack and the current rebuilding of the shattered communities in the Gaza envelope. It was Israel's civil institutions and society that successfully mobilized to meet the immediate requirements to deal with thousands of people displaced, 1,200 murdered, more than 200 kidnapped, and significant destruction of the Gaza border communities. Instead of resilience being dependent on government institutions, initial recovery was led by volunteer groups such as Brothers in Arms, Brothers and Sisters for Israel, who were also the vanguard of the protesters against the current Israeli government. And if you saw video of those protest marches, you'll note that they marched under the Israeli flag and their slogan was taken directly from Hatikva. And then on the 7th of October, they pivoted almost seamlessly to provide every conceivable type of support to the entire country, even to the extent of rescuing those under siege on the day of the Hamas attack. Resilience relies on national leadership that can support and rally the people, and it is most definitely not limited to political leadership. Within days, the same volunteer groups launched a well-organized effort to provide survivors with clothing, food, shelter, as well as psychological support and assistance to mourners with religious ritual. In a high-tech section, volunteers even used artificial intelligence against social media, those terrible Hamas GoPro videos, to try to identify the missing. This civilian hub, as it was called, was hosted at the Expo Center in Tel Aviv, and it was an incredibly efficient and responsive organization, all run by volunteers from throughout Israel. A key part of resilience must also be the return of the inhabitants to their communities in the south and the north. This is key to Israel's national security, to rebuild these communities. Recent surveys indicate that more than 70% of these residents intend to return to their homes when possible. A good number, already over 50%, have already returned to homes that are habitable. However, there are communities in the South that were terribly devastated, as you know, both physically and emotionally by the Hamas attack. Not only are the physical structures destroyed, but survivors have the trauma of having witnessed atrocities committed against their families, friends, and neighbors. How can these damaged communities be resurrected, and how is this critical to Israeli resilience? To understand this part of the resilience strategy, I spoke with Alon Futterman, who's the CEO of the Kfar Aza Foundation. Kfar Aza is a kibbutz success story, a storied socialist multi-generational community within Israel's original borders with just under 1,000 members. About 40% of the homes on the kibbutz were destroyed and left physically uninhabitable after the Hamas attack. Many other homes were declared violated due to the atrocities committed within their walls, making it psychologically impossible for the survivors to return. 65 people at Kfar Aza were killed in the attack on the 7th of October, and 18 hostages were taken. 5 hostages are still currently held by Hamas. The kibbutz members are activists among the Israeli hostage family community. Some 800 of the Kfar Aza kibbutz members are committed to returning. Why? Alon talked to me about both the personal and national impetus, 2 key sources that strengthen resilience. At the basic level, they want their homes back. On the national level, this is core Zionism, a kibbutz within the borders of the state of Israel with many of its founders still alive. This is their legacy, Alon notes. They don't want to abandon their community to their enemies, and they want to rebuild a bigger and better Kfar Aza. Joe and I visited Israel in March. This was not an ordinary visit, although we were there to see our family and friends. It allowed us to understand and appreciate this latest version of Jewish resilience, the Israeli brand, firsthand. The streets of Tel Aviv were as busy as ever, filled with traffic and the usual urban bustle. Beneath that buzz of normalcy, there are signs of terrible national angst. Posters of the hostages being held by Hamas and yellow ribbons emblazoned with the slogan, "Bring them home." We went to what is now known as Hostage Square in the plaza in front of the Tel Aviv Museum, an organically established place of activism, sadness, and hope, where hostage families and their communities draw strength from each other and those joining them from all over Israel and the world. Joe went to volunteer at Israel's food bank, Leket, and marveled at the incredible efficiency of the operation and the diversity of volunteers, retired Israelis, visiting French and American Jews, tech sector company employees, and Israeli from all walks of life. They drew strength from each other during a difficult time. And then we would witness the amazing personal resilience of Israeli families. We would pick up our grandson from Gan and walk to the playground where the parents and grandparents, worried as they were, would watch the kids cavort with joy as if nothing had changed. But let's be honest, a lot has changed since October 7th. The effort to move forward cannot really occur without a resolution of the hostage situation. And what constitutes a resolution, an end to some of the pain and suffering of these families, is still an open question. One afternoon, I sat talking with Dr. Meir Elron, a retired IDF general and former deputy head of military intelligence. He's a wonderful, thoughtful person who has spoken to my graduate students on numerous occasions about his post-military specialty, resilience in the wake of terrorism, a problem with which Israelis have all too much experience. We chatted about the political and war situation and compared our views on what went wrong, the intelligence failures that allowed Hamas to breach Israel's border on October 7th. I think it was at this point that I probably sighed audibly, and we both went silent for a moment because things are difficult and incredibly challenging for Jews everywhere right now. And then Meir said this to me, in a very general type way, by the way. Rhea, here's what you have to understand. Who would have thought that 3 years after the Shoah, that we would have our own state? Who would have thought that state would end up taking in Jews from all over the world and giving them a home? Who would have thought that we could have built this amazing country? And you know why we were able to do all that? He paused and he said, because resilience is the most important part of Jewish DNA, and it has been that way through the entire history of the Jewish people. And Meir is absolutely right. Under the most difficult circumstances, even the catastrophe of the Shoah, even after October 7th, the Jewish people live, Am Yisrael El Chai, because of that resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhea, for that really provocative, moving talk. I couldn't agree with you more about resilience. Being a student of history, knowing just reading the stories of our people over the ages and what we've endured, the fact that we're still here is a miracle, but also a testament to something within our DNA, as that general, you quoted that general saying, there must be something in us that forces us to keep on going and to stay together. So thank you for sharing that, making it personal and making it general too. So does anybody have any questions or comments for Rhea? Yes, Sumner. Let's stay away from politics, so I'll stop you right there. No, we're not going to talk about politics. I'm sorry.
Jonah knows I would die to talk about Bibi, but I won't.
No.
Because it's inappropriate for Yom HaShoah.
Right. Yes. So Sumner is asking about the political divisions in the country. So maybe you can comment on that without giving an opinion about one political side or the other.
Sure.
Does the political division affect the resilience?
Yes, and it's a wonderful point, Sumner, because one of the things Meir does with his team is they study the factors that lead to resilience, right, in general. And one of them is coherent national leadership, and I won't comment further. And the other is national unity. It appears in Israel, unlike a lot of other places, national unity doesn't necessarily lead to the resilience because it seems to occur up over and above what happens, but it's still a troubling point. And it's something they look at because they also have looked at the convergence between national unity and the resilience of the people who survived in the kibbutzim in the South. And if that was a relevant point, and obviously they don't have a conclusion, but generally speaking, you look to that. And, you know, in all fairness, I think there is unity on certain distinct points, but, you know, the Israeli political system is very interesting.
Yes. Richard.
Thank you. Two questions. Number one, how old were your parents when they died? And did they know what you had made of yourself?
Did they know what?
What you've made of yourself. So repeat for people on Zoom how Richard Abraham is asking, how old were Rhea's parents when they passed away, and did they know of what success Rhea and family have achieved?
So I think my father just turned 80 when he died, but I always say about my father, and I will get choked up, that he was my biggest fan. And my parents specifically always supported anything I did educationally. I used to joke around and say there was a lot more money. My father was a kosher butcher. There was a lot more money in brisket than I thought. And my mother died when she was 93. And I will tell you, one of my mother's greatest sources of pride was, of course, to see grandchildren, but then one of my nieces had one of her children while my mother was still alive, and my mother was blown away by having a great-grandchild. So those were really important things. But I think they were proud of their children, and let's be honest, like a lot of survivors, and I think immigrants in general as well, they put an awful lot into that. That was the most important thing for them. There was nothing else that mattered. And I see some people shaking their heads whose parents were also survivors. It was a really big part of it.
I did an unveiling today for a Holocaust survivor who died a year and a half ago, and at the time of his funeral, the family had remembered that he had said once his granddaughter was born, he felt that he defeated Hitler in that way. Any other? Yeah, Stuart.
Ruby and I, this past week, watched a PBS Frontline called Nazi Town, USA, and it talked about the German American Woman in the 1930s. And so while history doesn't repeat itself, some of that tries. Watching that documentary, and really the overt anti-Semitism. This country less than 100 years ago, in the United States, and worldwide, certainly it is alarming is the word, but concerning as a Jew. And I reflect back on what I know of German Jews, European Jews, this can't happen here. We're integrated into society, and how American Jews view their role in society.
They show the footage from the Bund meeting at Madison Square Garden with George Washington. It was very touching there, yeah.
My question is, in the light of that, as Jews today, American and then worldwide, what kinds of things do you think we can do to protect ourselves and ensure our safety?
So just to repeat for those on Zoom who couldn't hear, so Stuart was talking about a PBS special that was about Nazi Town, USA, about 80 years ago, 90 years ago in America. How did they not see the signs then of rising anti-Semitism and coming of Hitler? What are we supposed to learn today about the rising anti-Semitism in this country? What are the signs we're supposed to look for? What are we supposed to do?
Oh, well.
Do you have the answer to that?
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it is a whole course, actually.
Yes, yeah.
A big course. One of the things I used to say to my relatives in Belgium, just to annoy them, was, because we were in America, was that, when you're caught between the left and the right in terms of anti-Semitism, you're really in trouble. That's your signal to get out of Dodge. Now, luckily, none of them have thrown that back in my face yet. And I think you have to become incredibly alert, and you have to choose your battles very wisely. Because I work on a college campus, GW, and I went to Columbia, so I feel I have all the bases covered here. Mm-hmm. It is really hard for me to watch what's going on, but there's a couple of things I want to mention, and one is, there's a wonderful article today by Yossi Klein Halevi in the Times of Israel blog. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about that I think is important is
it's called The Attack on the Zionist Story. Just look for it. Yossi Klein Halevi, Times of Israel blog, very important piece.
And so refuting that is important. But the other point he makes, which is really interesting to me because it relates back to the Holocaust, is that we probably made some mistakes in Holocaust education. Not the fact that we teach it, but the fact that we turned it into this universal concept that almost washed itself of the Jewish element of it. And, when you look at the buildup to certain anti-Semitism, that's what you see. You see, for example, a ceremony in the UK that doesn't include Jews in a discussion of the Holocaust. You see at the Anne Frank house that they chastise a worker for wearing a kippah. I mean, as soon as you see that, to me, that's a danger signal, but it's also an educational issue. So at the same time that we're talking about all these huge plans in the United States for new definitions and other things, we seem to maybe have dropped the ball and gotten a little bit distracted because we're so dedicated to certain universal concepts. And there's a delicate balance there, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, a lot of people on the left in America, Jews who are on the left in America, feel let down, to say the least, by forces on the left, non-Jewish forces on the left. How could they reflect such anti-Semitic comments and things like that? So yeah, there's a lot to be thinking about in terms of what we thought as we're fighting for social justice, and where have our partners gone, and how does that impact this fight against anti-Semitism? Yeah, David. So David's asking, what would be one lesson for young Jews today about how to be resilient going forward?
I think they have to consider the importance of Jewish peoplehood versus some of the other priorities we've given them. I'm being completely honest here, in religious education and other things like that. In fact, the head of the Reform movement this morning made a comment that I thought was remarkable and honest, and it's not just about the Reform movement, of course, saying that he has to go and look and understand why there's so many young people in his movement who are so anti-Israel. Of course, the best thing you could do in most cases is send your kids to Israel, although in some cases they end up marrying an Israeli and living there. So go figure. But I think that exposure, warts and all, because there's lots of warts in Israel, it makes a tremendous difference. And that's why you need that. But I also think, I talked to a young colleague of mine, and this really affected me, this conversation. She's actually the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and she's very bright and younger. And so I said to her, what's the secret sauce? And she talked about the fact that she spent her entire religious education focused on, not a bad thing, tikkun olam. But nobody talked about Jewish peoplehood. Nobody talked about Israel. There's a lot of wonderful causes out there, but when you eliminate them, and I've looked on synagogue websites and I see no mention of the state of Israel or Jewish peoplehood in a lot of cases. And I think that is a serious problem. And if you listen to some of these kids, one of the problems they have is they don't see Israel or Jewish peoplehood as prime to Jewish identity. So you got to fix that, right? Also, I would also say to people, some of this is going to pass. On the college campuses, now you've already heard me talk about this, students are transient, faculty is forever, unfortunately, let me add. And so as a result, until you can really move away from the heavy ideological hierarchy that exists in a lot of really good schools, you're going to continue to have this problem as a Jewish student.
Ira.
Yeah, I read an article a couple of days ago exactly that point. It said that Qatar, by Saudi Arabia, is donating billions of dollars to schools. And the schools gladly accept
Absolutely.
$10 million donation and say, what do you want for it? They say, oh, we like Muslim programs and programs, just equality and the article basically said that this quiet rising of
it's not that slow.
So that's another issue that
Oh,
Ira's
sorry,
bringing up
yes,
of the Arab countries in the Middle East being major donors to college campuses and the influence of those billions of dollars on college campuses today.
So if you look at Middle East Studies departments, which has always been interesting for me, because I teach at a School of International Affairs, they were already like this 15 years ago. I mean, they don't have courses on Israel, or, and it wasn't just from money, but they're being sustained by Qatari money now. And so, like, I can name the amount of money that comes into GW and certain departments, and certainly Columbia, and no one has tried to stem that. And by the way, in addition to doing that, the Qataris run a foundation, and the foundation actually has set out lecturers across the world who actually engage in anti-Semitic discussion. And no one stops it. You can see how difficult it is for the US to play around with it, because Qatar has some US facilities there while they host our Hamas friends in the penthouse of the Ritz-Carlton. So I think there's an issue there. Now the Saudis, and I think this is an interesting thing, were knee deep in this stuff for many years, and their schools, of course, their schools that they sponsored in the United States and elsewhere were virulently anti-Semitic. They weren't just anti-Israel, they were anti-Semitic. And they have backed off from that a bit because A, they got control over their charities, and B, they realized how embarrassing it was after 9/11, and C, they're worried about the Iranians, right? So we have that whole thing going on at the same time. I don't know what we do about the Qataris. I will tell you, schools will take money from wherever they get it. I really have an interesting selection of schools. They're like the most anti-Semitic schools in the world. I go to them. Now, London School of Economics, which took $2 million from Muammar Gaddafi and gave his son a PhD. And of course, I remind them of that whenever they call me, so.
All right, so we've gone a little bit far afield here, but I want to thank Rhea very much for sharing personally with us the story of her parents and her family, and to make us aware also in this way about all of us, how we have the resilience DNA in us, and that through thick and thin, we are here together as a community, remembering the 6 million, remembering October 7th, and fighting for the Jewish future. So thank you, Rhea. So have a good night. What's that? Oh.